Welcome to Question Mark, the podcast, exploring the greatest story ever told with open minds and open hearts.
We light it up, we won't come down, and the sun can't stop us now. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show, where it's covered in all the colored lights, and the runaways are on in the night. Impossible comes true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show.
Welcome to Question Mark, a no-holds-barred, frank conversation about what some people say is the greatest story ever told, Mark's Gospel. My name is Stephen Smart. I've got to know this Gospel really well because for the last decade or so, I've performed it as a one-man show, I Am Mark. So I'm now really excited that in this podcast, I get the chance to chat about it with all sorts of fabulous guests. Many of them are experts in the field, and all of them have fascinating things to say. If you fancy joining us as we unpack this incredible tale, do stay tuned. And if you like what you hear and you don't want to miss any future episodes, then please click on the subscribe or follow button. This will help other people find the podcast more easily so that they can enjoy it too.
I'm so grateful today to be with some very, very special guests. These are none other than Fee Smart, and yes, she is a relation, and Alex Thompson. These guys, I would guarantee you, if you ever meet them, they are the funnest, most beautiful, talented people I know. I know I'm maybe a little bit biased, as you'll soon hear, but also we have had some great conversations, haven't we, in the past, guys? And I'm so grateful that you agreed to talk about this as well, which is, as you know, a big passion of mine. And I'm so happy because I know that what we're going to be talking about today is going to be new and fascinating, given the sorts of backgrounds you both come from. But having said that, I better leave it up to you guys now to tell us a little bit more about who you are and how you know me.
Take it away, Maestro.
I'm Fee Smart, and I am doing a PhD at the moment in literature and psychoanalysis, and I'm also a jazz singer, so those are two part-time things. My academic pseudonym, or my born name, my birth name, is Genevieve Smart as well, and I am Stephen Smart's daughter.
No.
Very lucky to be Stephen Smart.
How can someone so beautiful come from this? I can't see that.
It was
miracle. Absolutely. And Alex, can you tell us a little bit about who you are?
Hello, my name is Alex Thompson. I'm Genevieve Smart's partner, and therefore I know Stephen through Fee Smart. I guess that's probably the best way for me to explain it. I am a musician, music teacher. I also used to be, and still technically currently am, a tap dance teacher as well. So I'm not entirely sure how much jazz music theory is going to play into the role of understanding this passage, but yeah, so that's my
Your bio.
my bio, my role in this conversation.
Listen, to anyone who's watching or listening to this, let me explain. They are holding back a great deal about how talented they are. And I just want to say a big shout out before we go any further. If you listen to nothing else about this podcast, listen to this bit here. The Jazz Apples are the supreme jazz band of the Midlands, if not all over the UK, as far as I'm concerned. So I just recommend you look them up and listen to them because they're amazing. The Jazz Apples. Just let that be the thing you remember from this podcast. Anyway, without further ado, I also want to explain very briefly about my guests that they're hiding their lights a little bit under a bushel here. Because Fee, I didn't think you mentioned that you were studying for a PhD, did you?
Yeah, did mention.
Did you mention the subject matter about what you're doing?
Yeah, I said literature and psychoanalysis, and I left it there to be cryptic.
Okay, well, maybe that'll come out in our discussions.
Yeah.
Fee is like hugely intellectual and brilliant, as well as being talented. So I am dwarfed by this person, even though in my previous life as an English teacher, I actually taught her in the sixth form, believe it or not. So I can claim a little smidgen of fame here, but other than that, she is amazing. And then Alex, you know, he's so widely read, it staggers me, and so intellectual. This pair are incredible. I'm so happy that they're with me. So anyway, without further ado, we better start the podcast, hadn't we? So let's listen to, in fact, our good friend, Lucy Warner, who Fee introduced me to some time ago. Our good friend, Lucy Warner, who's going to read the passage, and it is from Mark chapter 1. I'm going to find the passage. Hold on a second. 29, verses 29 to 39. So over to Lucy.
Mark chapter 1, verses 29 to 39, New International Version. As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak, because they knew who he was. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place, where he prayed. Simon and his companions went to look for him, and when they found him, they exclaimed, "Everyone is looking for you." Jesus replied, "Let us go somewhere else, to the nearby villages, so I can preach there also. That is why I have come." So he travelled throughout Galilee, preaching in their synagogues and driving out demons.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lucy, for that. So guys, listen, I'll do the same as I've done with every single guest who's been on the show. What did you think? Any first reactions? Any things that jumped out at you? Any questions? Any thoughts?
I'll let you go first.
Thank you.
Sorry.
First reaction. Okay. And this might end up being a really long answer, but my first reaction was that there was an awful lot of expelling of badness. So I was quite drawn to the idea of how and why there was a need to expel all the badness and put it somewhere else. And so my first reaction was, oh dear, and I'll get to why in a minute. But then my second reaction when I did some deeper reading was actually there was something that was ethically incredibly important about the way that Jesus deals with expulsion in psychoanalytic terms. But I'll maybe get onto that later because otherwise I'll go into big rant.
Okay, just quickly checking with you on the badness thing. What are the details of the badness here, just so we're clear?
I would sort of sum it all up as to do with demons, illness, uncleanliness, Satan. Yeah.
There's quite a lot of badness there, isn't there, really, when you think about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think they kind of seem to be quite combined, particularly the demons and illness, because there's lots of juxtapositions there that make us compare them.
It's funny to say. Can I briefly interrupt? Because I think it's funny you should say that, because I was just reading for this podcast this afternoon, and actually that's right, because the in Jewish times in those days, having a fever was associated with having been either chastised by God or being possessed by some kind of evil spirit or attacked by some sort of evil spirit. So having a fever was a big thing, and it was actually literally associated with what you're saying. So
it's really interesting. Do you want to say your first impression before I go on away?
Yeah, sure. I had a few first impressions. My first thought was, wow, Jesus is taking on a lot. here.
Yeah.
That is a heck of an amount for one human being to have to deal with constantly. And sounded like he never got a moment of respite, even in his waking up early and finding his solitary thing, and everyone solitary place, and people interrupting that space. As an introvert myself, that's something that I picked up on massively. Is I don't like my space being occupied and interrupted when I know it's my safe space. So I was like, wow, I'd kick off if I was him. But
I agree. No time for himself. And apart from that, Alex, he was working like all the time, and he got up in the middle of the night before anyone else could have woken up. So he must have had how many hours sleep? Very little. Very little. He would have been absolutely shattered.
Yeah, I think we see that in microcosm with the mother-in-law as well, who is really sick, and then Jesus heals her, and then immediately she has to serve her guests. So I guess the message is, if we're to be like her, or if we're to be like Jesus, the message is continual serving, which is interesting. It's sort of it makes me tired when I think about it.
Absolutely. So if you sign up to the sort of thing that Jesus wants people to sign up to here, when he talks about calling people to be his disciples, we're not talking about an easy ride, are we? Potentially. In fact, far from it. If these examples are anything to go by. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I noticed you used the word "has to serve." She has to serve, and I was wondering whether this would come up in saying, okay, here is a member of the female species brought into this situation here. Have you got any thoughts, or maybe thoughts is too soft a word? Any reactions?
My first reaction was, oh my goodness, like, because there was a moment of recognition of, that this is a very commonplace situation for women, that they can only rest when they're sick, and even then it's not always easy. However, the fact that Jesus is also modeling the same example potentially undoes a little bit of that gendered significance there. But I would have to read the way in which women in the whole of the gospel interact with the idea of serving, which you'll be the expert on more than me.
Listen, I'm aware. I'm feeling slightly embarrassed at this point, and because I don't know whether what I'm about to say is going to A, be strictly true, and B, whether it's going to in any way placate you. So I will say it, and I'll let you kind of respond if you like. So I agree with you. When you first read this, it seems like, okay, this woman, okay, she doesn't get a name. So like the disciples get a name, but she doesn't get a name. So why is she any less important? She's in bed. Yeah, right. She may be right there. If she wasn't in bed, she'd be working. So this is the only chance for her to rest, potentially. And then as soon as she is healed, the first thing she does is serve Jesus. And not only Jesus, she waited on them. It's like everybody, all the men, I would presume. So you immediately begin to think, your hackles begin to rise, don't they? And you think, oh, yeah, it's typical patriarchal society, blah. But then I did a little bit of digging, and it seemed to me that this was something a little bit less obvious, a bit more subtle. And there is this thing about Jesus actually interacting with women in the first place. Like, he wasn't supposed to. He not only interacted with her, as a rabbi, it wouldn't be acceptable for him to do that, but he touched her. I mean, he physically touched her. And not only that, he did it on the Sabbath. Now, that in itself would have been frowned on, potentially, that he was even though it was behind closed doors, to do this sort of thing on the Sabbath, as later on he comes up against this sort of thing a lot, is very frowned on by the religious authorities. So in touching the woman, he's doing something against the norm, and in healing her on the Sabbath, it's against the norm. And the thing about waiting Well, serving him. Okay, it's possible women in those days were supposed to do that. I appreciate, but I wonder whether Mark is making a point about this. So this is my theory, okay, and it's I think this is a heavily symbolic episode.
Yeah,
because she is, well, they think on the verge of dying. It's not like, she's not got a flu. Even if she did, they don't think she's got much chance of living. She's on the verge of dying, and not only that, she's got a fever, and a fever would have been considered, again, as I said earlier, a kind of curse. Like, it's a huge thing. It's not a common thing to have a fever. Fever is not a good thing. It's a sign of badness, as you put it. Jesus does what only God would be expected to do. He heals her. And it's almost like she's been given another chance. And in fact, the words where it says he grasped her hand and helped her up, or raised her up, that word raised her up is the same word used of Jesus' resurrection. So she's got this new life. Do you understand where the symbolic thing might be?
Definitely. Yeah.
Jesus touches her. She's nearly dead, on the verge of death. She gets new life. She's raised up. And the first thing she does is serve him and his disciples. So I think it's a picture of the Christian life. I don't think it's a picture necessarily just of this woman. And the way it's described is meant to convey a message to Mark's first listeners. It also might be about rising from the dead as well, literally rising from the dead. Be that as it may, I think the word service here is really important from a kind of theological point of view. It's not meant to say, oh, by the way, women, they were just servants. That's not kind of the point, if you see what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, definitely. I think the parallel is really, really clear. And if anything, I'm not going to say it's a compliment, but it raises her to the position of Jesus, which has some significance. So I think it's from a kind of contemporary reading that I would be jolted and think, very familiar. But I understand even on just a literary scale how those comparisons are brought out. Yeah.
Interesting.
Sure.
So you wouldn't think, because when I read it through, I was thinking about debt and how she was helped up. I don't know whether it's said that she asked for the help or whether they took her. He went to her and raised her up, and then she felt better, and then she was indebted. And so there's a feeling of debt that she has to repay. Jesus, that I don't know, maybe people feel like in the church, if this is a huge like jump massively, but maybe in the church when people feel like they're feeling better or feel like they have some purpose, or they go to church and then they donate money and things like that, and they feel indebted. I just wondered whether that whole idea of service, I was just so confused because obviously there's so many meanings behind it all. I sort of didn't know where to turn or look with it.
So you're basically saying you're sensing that the woman was so kind of pleased that she'd been healed, that as a result of that she feels it's like an obligation to serve. Is that what you're saying, as a debt?
I don't even know if she was pleased. Don't know.
Well, we don't know.
That's the thing. It could be that it was just that's what was done. That as soon as a debt occurs, us as human beings, or culturally back then when it happened, that she felt like she had a debt to pay then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the ultimate debt payment in the gospel is Jesus dying on the cross to repay the original sin, because I think that's what the thing is. The idea is that if we're born in sin, then we must serve to kind of find a way to repay. Jesus is supposed to then wipe away all the debt. However, I think there's probably still a bit of a tension in the idea of servitude, that whether or not we are kind of, I don't want to say loved unconditionally, but whether or not we owe anything to God just by existing.
Yeah.
And I think that it's held in tension. I don't necessarily know that it's always resolved, but I think it's definitely there, present.
Yeah. I love the idea of this tension thing that you're talking about. I'm not saying I can puzzle my head around that one, but I think I go back to this idea of service as not necessarily being a bad thing. I think that's what, at least for the time, at least for the first listeners of this story, they would have seen it actually as a very positive thing. And we tend to think of service as a bad thing. And, especially right now with lots of reference to, slavery and all that past, which we hate the fact we got involved in that as a country and so on. We're now regretful and embarrassed about that. But I think in those days, service was something else, perhaps. And I think you're right when you say you're likening it to Jesus, because that's exactly the word he uses of himself. He says, I've come to serve, and that means even to the death. So it's about submitting for the sake of others, for the sake of love. And even the angels in the previous episode in this gospel, really early on in the gospel, they're said to serve him in the wilderness. They minister to him. So there's something about service which is supposed to be actually really, really good. So yeah, I'm not sure whether I've explained anything really, if any notes.
It all goes down to agency. If it's voluntary, then it can be a wonderful thing to kind of give one's life to a greater cause. And if it's not voluntary, then it's not a great idea. So
agreed, definitely. So we've talked a lot about her. Any other thoughts about that part of the passage or other parts of the passage?
I have a lot to say on the idea of expelling.
I'll see you later.
Go for it. Let's hear it. Let's hear it. We love it.
I was obviously very interested in this because, well, we've had many conversations about the idea in psychoanalysis of abjection, which is where you have something within yourself you're not very happy about, whether that's some guilt, some desire, whatever it is. You don't know that you're unhappy about it, but you then project it onto another person. So you say, it's not me, it's you, it's that person over there. And it tends to lead on an individual social level, but on a kind of worldwide scale as well, to a process of othering. So we see the person over there as the baddie and we blame them for all the problems that really are from ourselves. So that was my immediate kind of moment when I first read it, because when I see the words unclean coming clean, I think, well, where does the dirt go and who does the dirt attach to? And that makes me a little bit worried. But then I thought about it more carefully and I realized that there are basically two interpretations to this passage. One that fulfills the idea of abjection, but the other one where I would say Jesus is a kind of companion to the darkness, to the difficult stuff, to maybe even the evil stuff. He walks into it, he's gentle to it, he's its friend, and he almost recognizes it in the world, and maybe even in himself, although that's a hugely controversial claim, and in others. So I have quite a few bits of the passage that I'm just going to go through. I hope you don't mind.
Go for it.
So the first, this is prior, the beginning of Mark begins with the desert, and Jesus is among the wild animals. So straight away we have this kind of association of Christ with the body, with the human animal, which is something which the Christian tradition typically has found sometimes a little bit uncomfortable. You know, the body and the soul has been something that has been attempted to be separated. When we get a repetition of the desert when Jesus goes to pray in the solitary place, which is, I think, really importantly dark, because it's the unknown, it's the scary. And because we're brought back to the desert, it's also a place where we wouldn't necessarily expect to see God, and yet here he is praying to God in that place. And that made me think about Jesus's function in the gospel in general, that he doesn't, although there is a kind of big question around whether Jesus is God, therefore Jesus is good, Jesus ultimately attaches himself to evil because he takes on the sins of everyone. Yeah. Ultimately, he actually becomes all of that stuff that he is expelling. It's not just a clear expulsion, it's also a recognition, or at least a kind of taking on of that stuff. So when he does, for example, speak to the demons, it's not just that he recognizes the demons, they also recognize who he is, which is a bit of a sticky point. And again, at the end, we have when the demons do appear in this part of Mark, the places where they're found are in synagogues. So again, we have holy places that contain bad. So that's basically what I'm trying to say, is that rather than a clear-cut expulsion, which would, I think, be ethically damaging, we have something which is much more of a blurring of good and bad, which actually brings love into the darkness rather than separates the two. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I tell you what, I find the overall thesis really compelling. This idea that love is prepared to move into the darkness and even what's the word? Absorb it. You know, it's not afraid. It's not kind of pushing it away. It's accepting it exists. So I think personally that's exactly what Jesus is like, and I'm so pleased that you referenced his death on the cross, because I think that if you could look at that and say, yeah, that's what another part of the Bible says he did. He became sin for us. Whatever that means, it's not about him rejecting sin, throwing it into some kind of fiery pit, but actually absorbing all the bad stuff, all of it, on himself for everyone else's sake. Which sounds to me brilliant. And I would also suggest that's true of his interactions with us personally. He doesn't look at us and see only good bits, obviously, because that would be a lie. We are full of different things, mixture, some not so good things as well as some lovely things. And yet he loves each of us, in my opinion, unconditionally. In other words, he knows about that other stuff. He still loves us. Doesn't matter about that stuff. He doesn't draw a line and say, okay, only when you can be good, then I'll love you. I love you as you are, because you're completely mixed up and a bit of a mess. You're good some days, you're bad other days. You're mixtures, all of you, but I still love you. Just like a father would love their children unconditionally. This is like 10 times better, a million times better than that. So your overall thesis, I completely understand and agree with. What I'm struggling with, if I'm honest, because I haven't got my head around what you said, because you are, as I said earlier, incredibly brainy, much more brainy than me. I haven't actually got my head around how that applies to the passage.
As in the particular moments of it?
Yeah, in this passage. So I can see how Jesus, when he drives out demons from people or impure spirits, he does that lovingly. And it's not like, yeah, I can see that he's caring. I think there's a word here in the Greek about, I think it's the same word that we use for therapy. So it's not like, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, let's drive out a few demons. It's actually caring for the individual and taking a long time. So that's why I think he probably had little sleep, because each one of them would have been cared for over a protracted period of time. But yeah.
I think that on a literary scale, that's where it was coming for me. It was like, okay, what symbol is being repeated and where? So what's getting blurred when, for example, we bring something we've associated with the desert, the devil, into the plays. How's that blurring make sense? The other one that I didn't mention was we've got a juxtaposition of the kind of, well, I read him as quite an antagonistic figure in the synagogue, where he says he's possessed by a demon and he says, Jesus, what do you want from me? You know, and then we have immediately after that the Simon's mother-in-law, whose illness is expelled, who she's obviously part of, in some way, part of the clan, part of the disciples, part of the me side of things. So what I kind of was picking up on was not obviously in Jesus's actions, but also just in the way that the story has been woven, that it's always a little bit unclear as to where the good and bad is lying, and that allows us to see Jesus in all of it.
Yeah, that's lovely. That's really lovely. Wow, thank you very much. Alex, what have you got? Have you got anything to say about that? Or
I can't top that. Why did you ask me? I'm gonna top that.
Right, I am.
I'm a PhD student, and you're asking me how to top that.
I'm needing help because I'm similarly.
Well, if we analyse the unconscious, and then we look at it from a purely id perspective, or we look at Jesus as superego for a little bit. No, I don't. Yeah, very good.
I think what might work though, if we took up Fee on her idea about the desert, because I think that is an interesting one. Because I think, as far as I can understand, what she just said was, the desert is a place associated with badness, because in the previous episode, that's where Satan was, and also the wild animals potentially are bad. And yet here in this episode, he's gone out to the desert to be with God, and it's the same place. How does that work? And what you're saying is, your conclusion, Fee, is Jesus is in both the good and the bad. I can see that. It's very persuasive. I think there is an ambiguity there, and I don't know what the resolution is, but maybe just to think about it aloud a bit, just for a few moments. The desert also is, in the Bible, it's associated with evil, definitely overall, but it's also associated with being alone and interacting with God. So Moses was in the desert. That was a big moment of interaction with God. Elijah was in the desert, big moment of interaction with God. Nasty place, evil, potentially, full of evil in some ways. Certainly potentially a place where you might expect to die. But in some ways also a place where it's more likely that you'll have that connection with God.
I think that's very productive from a therapy perspective as well, that we are told that in order to kind of reach God or goodness, transcendence, self-knowledge, purpose, whatever that is, we need to walk through our solitary darkness, the unknown stuff. For me, the desert signifies the unknown. It's the unstructured and the chaotic as well. We have to immerse ourselves and really walk through and understand ourselves before we get to that, which is also the way in which I think Jesus performing the act of crucifixion in order to save the world, he also has to do that. He also has to immerse himself in all the darkness, become sin in order for it to be cleansed. It can't be cleansed by expelling. It has only be cleansed by this sort of complete immersion. So on a individual level as well, in terms of psychic health, I think it suggests that the only way through is down.
I love
deep
it.
Down.
I don't know if I don't know if all our listeners would agree with that. Some people may say that's very introspective, but I'd so agree with it. That part of knowing God is about knowing who you are, who we are as individuals, finding out about ourselves, discovering who we are deep down. The two things from my point of view are synonymous in some ways. They go together. You can't do one without the other. You need both. And the deeper you go, the more you realize, how complicated we are, fragile and full of contradiction we are. And it's coming to terms with those things, isn't it? About understanding and being able to have a certain amount of compassion for yourself. In some ways, I think personally, you're reflecting God's compassion
Mm.
for you in all that stuff, all that messiness. And it's not, being a Christian for me isn't about performing and being a good person. That's the last thing that being a Christian is about. It's about recognizing who we really are, actually, and recognizing we need God, and and owning up to the fact we need help. Really, no more than that.
I was thinking of he who cast the first stone, etc., etc. I think that it's an ethical imperative to look at yourself, because otherwise, as I said at the very beginning, you will always transplant your badness onto someone else.
Yeah.
If we want to be someone who's compassionate and kind in the world as Jesus is, then I think it's very important.
That's why he says, when you look at someone else and you see a speck in their eye, make sure you take the log out of your own eye first. Then you can see more clearly about the other person. Yeah.
Amazing. That's really cool.
It's not in Mark's gospel, by the way.
Did you have any other thoughts?
I'll tell you what we'll do, guys. I'll tell you what, because this has been high powered and I've got to be honest, exhausting from my point of view. So I need a bit of a breather. So let's have a few moments breather while we listen to my good friend, Mikey Powell, who's going to be producing another one of his amazing songs. And this one's called Thank You.
So when joy pours down like summer rain, refreshing barren lands, we will not forget that these gifts came directly from your hands. And when sorrows beat like crashing waves upon our battered souls, we remind ourselves that our God saves. May gratitude our goal. Circumstance will not dictate. We'll never stop singing. Thank you, Lord. You forgive and you restore. Thank you, Lord. For you remember our sin no more. You have been so good to us. You have been so good to us.
Well, welcome back, everyone. And here again, I have Alex Thompson and Fee Smart, these amazing people who happen to be in my personal life. I'm so grateful for that. And we've had a wonderful discussion so far about Mark's Gospel, chapter 1, verses 29 to 39. And Alex, I think you were going to say a little bit more about your own thoughts about the passage.
So a lot of what I was thinking has already been talked upon by wonderful Fee here. I don't necessarily have a lot to bring, but I just have more questions, I guess, more than anything. My one thing that I picked up on was this there's an overriding theme or a constant focus on being seen, and maybe the gaze is too broad a term, but like the visual, there's a very visual focus on throughout the passage, such as Jesus sort of shining a light or putting a visual focus on demons and getting them out. And likewise, I think it was before the passage begins, where the demon says, where is it here? I can't remember what it says, but basically the demon's trying to sort of show everyone who Jesus really is. Jesus is trying to not have a light shone upon him and be seen for who he really is by everyone. And then there's also the thing of everyone is looking for you.
Yeah, whilst he's in a dark place.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, when he's in a dark place, people are searching. I think I think the congregation is put into just the idea of the disciples. I don't know if it's just the disciples or everyone is looking for you, being the whole town and all the people that have been affected by his work. I say work. Yeah. But yeah, there's this constant sort of visual aspect to it, and it also, I feel like the way it's worded and the way it's written down, of this fixation on things being seen to be true, Jesus proving himself with this sort of visual, like the visual miracle, as it were. Yeah. And then everyone understanding understanding his power and his glory and grace, and etc.
I like that. Fee, you were saying you had a thought about what Alex said.
I have a thought, but it's not a closed thought at all. But you've made me think about something, because he, at the point where he's saying, I don't want to be seen, he also says he would not let the demons speak. And I was really interested in that, because I was reading that as a kind of I will stop the expression of this badness in this way, but at the same moment, by bringing demons out into visibility, he is almost allowing us to see everything, and as you're saying, he's proving himself. But he seems to stop words as proof, but bring visual in. That's a big question for me. I'm not sure about, but the thing about speaking was, again, I was interested just as a personal thing. I said, well, if Jesus was a therapist, going back to that word that you mentioned before, the word that was the root of therapy, if Jesus was a therapist, what kind of therapist would he be? Because I was really drawn to that bit where it said he would not let the demons speak, because in psychoanalysis, they talk a lot about the symptom, which is like a bodily manifestation of something going on in your unconscious. And they talk about the symptom as your unconscious speaking in ways that aren't words. So for example, if you have done something bad with this hand and then you get hand pain, that's like a typical example of your symptom speaking. So as a therapist, I was like, well, he's stopping the symptom speaking, but where does it then go? Where's the chance? Where's the outlet? Where's his 10 years of therapy on the couch to talk about the demons and how they affected him in his childhood, all that stuff? However, there was a kind of psychoanalytic sense of something that rung true of psychoanalysis for me, of making what was invisible visible, in terms of making what was unconscious conscious, as a route to healing. So I felt like there was a similarity in that sense, but you've really made me think now about why sight and not words.
I agree. I think there is an issue here. It's a very strange contradiction. I will try and answer a little bit of it. I know about sight, but I can't now think about how words fit in. I'll tell you what I had in my mind. Okay, here goes. So the sight thing, I agree with you. It's like a visual aid. It's like, as you were saying, it kind of shows the reader, shows the people there, this Jesus guy clearly is someone a bit extraordinary. He could even be the Son of God. He could even be God's representative. He could even be God himself. He's so extraordinary. This is the proof that the powers of evil submit to his authority. Bang! And he does it loads of times quickly. Not only is it proof of his authority, it's proof that he's coming to establish something else in the world that beats evil, that breaks evil's power. Okay, so Jesus talks about how he's coming to bring a kingdom of God, a new dimension of living. And so these incidents with the impure spirits and the demons is, you could say, it's like a sign of this coming power of God onto the earth through Jesus. that something else is happening. The world previously has been under the dominion of evil. I think this is what the Bible context seems to suggest. And Jesus is coming to bring something new, and this is the sign.
That's interesting.
So, but the speaking thing, I agree. If you're going to have a sign of people having demons expelled from them, why don't you allow them to speak? That seems to be contradictory.
I just had a thought as you were saying that. I suddenly remember, and I could be wrong, but is Jesus not called the Word himself?
Yes.
So just when you were talking about kind of this new world, almost like a new order of things, maybe it's this kind of, I will not let the demons speak. I'm the Word now.
Oh, I see.
I'm in this position now. I'm the Word, whatever the rest of the passage is.
Yeah. I think there's to be honest, there are loads of theories. I mean, about why doesn't the demons speak?
Right.
One theory, I'm not sure if I agree with it, but it's a theory, is he doesn't want, because let's put it this way, there are two audiences here. There's the audience there, okay, in the story, who are there observing all of this, and there's us, i.e. the reader. Mark is writing for us, as well as describing what happened. So when we think about the demons saying, what was the phrase? What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God. For us, that's really important because it actually then tells us who Jesus is. He is the Holy One of God. And that means something to an ancient audience. The Holy One of God would be the Messiah, the one who has been sent by God to save the world. It's a very, that's a very reduced description of him, but that's what he is. So when the demon says, you are the Holy One of God, that's like, for us as a reader, we're thinking, oh, that's who he is. Oh, right. Now I understand. But Jesus says, shut up. No, don't talk about it. So there must be another reason why he does that. And maybe for the audience there, he doesn't want everyone there to know about it, because if they did know about it, all sorts of things could happen, which he doesn't want. This is the explanation. Because if you said if people start saying, oh, he's the Holy One of God, he's the Messiah, the demons have said it, and he must be, they might misunderstand what the Messiah actually meant. So for some people in those days, and the Messiah meant someone who could physically save them from the Romans, could get a sword, loads of followers, and defeat the Romans in battle. That's not what Jesus is like at all. So one theory is he tries to stop the demons saying who he is because he doesn't want people to get the wrong idea about him. Even more, he doesn't want news to spread about this Messiah-ness, because if it does, he'd get into trouble quite quickly with the Jewish authorities. He doesn't want that yet. So there are all sorts of possible reasons.
Interesting. That's fascinating. It's fascinating that we as readers hear about who he is through the voice of a demon.
Yes.
That's pretty convincing there, because if your enemy is saying, oh, you're the Son of God, then we're probably going to believe the enemy, because they don't need to be a big fan.
That's true. and they have supernatural knowledge as well, so there's an element of authority.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I had one more comment, which I guess is probably just interesting to me. I hope not. When going back to the idea of, what kind of therapist would Jesus be, but then also made me think, what kind of therapy is most Jesus-like? And the stuff that I was talking about earlier about Jesus being a kind of companion to darkness and walking into it and etc. And the word we were looking at was therapio, the word for cured. That made me think about the dynamics of what therapy can be and what it can't be. And one of the fundamentals of the therapy that I've obviously talked about a lot today is the idea that we are all in some sense a little bit crazy, and there is no patient who holds all of the pathology and a wise kind of emotionally detached teacher. So I think Jesus is a really good example of this. Actually, like R.D. Laing in the 60s with the anti-psychiatry movement, Jesus was a bit like him, because R.D. Laing, when someone was
Bold statement.
or the other way around, maybe R.D. Laing was a bit like Jesus, right?
Yeah.
Depends on your position, but like, so for R.D. Laing, if there was a kind of psychotic patient who was rocking back and forth, he wouldn't sit there on the couch and say, tell me about your life. He would get down with the patient and he would rock with the patient. It was all about the kind of, as I said, companionship with darkness is what I've said quite a lot.
Yeah.
So again, like, Jesus's kind of power relations as well, when it comes to curing, it's not about him in the kind of typical sense that we would see a kind of God coming down, although he commands the demons, but he's a friend, he sits with, he recognizes, he takes on, he identifies, he shares in that, and that's the path to healing. So I thought there was something that I would take forward and kind of like how I would approach thinking about the ethics of my field, but I felt that that was also really important for just thinking about how we interact with pain in general.
Wow, how exciting, how inspiring. I can't tell you, that is, for me, you've hit the nail on the head there about Jesus and about who Jesus wants us to be. It's about that degree of empathy and sharing in the pain of others and traveling their road. Yeah, well, you two exemplify, I know.
I've got a question.
Go ahead.
What did you think of it, Stefan?
Of what?
Of the passage. What did you think? I'll turn you in now.
You've read it a lot.
I think the passage for me, I can't help looking at it and think symbolic things about it. It's a really, really interesting passage from that point of view, because for me, there's always a big question in this whole story. And I think it's a question that Mark sets up. And every episode, this one included, answers the question, but we have to dig a little bit deeper than just taking the facts on board. It's actually going a little bit beneath the surface, like we've done today. The question is, who is Jesus? And why on earth did he come? That's it. Nothing else is important. And I think this passage really illustrates that. Every passage builds on the other as a kind of answer to that question. But Mark doesn't make it easy for us. It's like he's not saying Jesus was such and such and this is why he came. Although, to be fair, he does say that in the first verse of the whole thing. But apart from that, he never says it again. Yeah. So it's like, okay, we have to ask ourselves, okay, who is this guy and why has he come? And it seems from our discussion that we recognize whoever he is, he's incredibly different and incredibly powerful and incredibly compassionate. And that's the starting point of a journey of wisdom and faith for us all, I think.
Definitely. When we ask that question, we learn what is important in terms of, or what should be important in our lives as well. I think that makes a lot of sense. It makes the whole gospel meditative rather than didactic.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I like that. It is, yeah. I was wondering whether didactic is actually what it is, but I think it's didactic in a meditative way.
Leads you, but it doesn't close the door.
Doesn't close the door. That's why we can have discussions like this, that we are allowed to ask questions and to play with it a little. I think that's the point. That it's not like, this is what you must believe. It's not that. It's about, what can you find out? What can you discover? What can you, when you start exploring, what leaps up at you?
What do you see?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll see. Yeah. One thing we haven't talked about, we must finish soon, but is Jesus gets interrupted in his prayers, doesn't he?
Mhm.
And his disciples, or Simon says, everyone's looking for you. And he says, no, I can't go back to Capernaum, the village. I've got to go on to talk elsewhere. What did you make of all that?
Selfish. Jesus, honestly. How dare you, mate? Honestly. There's people there to be saved. And you just leave them. He's drawn them out. He's got them all ready. He's got them all ripe for the pickings. And then he just let's move on.
So are you saying,
I don't know.
no, just quickly check this, because are you saying out of the goodness of his heart, Simon is saying to Jesus, listen, there's some people there who need you. They're suffering, and you're spending your time away from them. Come back. Is that his motive? Is that Simon's motive?
I mean, why else would they be looking for him?
I think it's about that kind of Christian search, isn't it, for God, for Jesus in your life. I think that's what they're looking for is, and we've got to kind of follow him. I also think, I mean, again, there's probably a lot going on that you'll again know about in terms of like the politics of all of it, but the fact that he doesn't stick to one place, and considering what you were saying about the Messiah being expected to fight the Romans and things like that, the fact that he doesn't stick to one place and he moves in between privileged places and domestic spaces and lepers, etc., etc., etc. This is a kind of, I don't want to say democratic Jesus because that's a bit anachronistic, but this is a Jesus who loves the entire world and makes that quite clear. Yeah,
I like that. Yeah, I mean, is it possible that when Simon says everyone's looking for you, he's aware of people's desire to come alongside Jesus, because Jesus does people good. He's aware of that. And I do like the idea that the phrase used is everyone is looking for you. So it's kind of, that's true. If we're looking for something that's going to answer the big questions of our lives, our deepest longings, it makes sense. Everyone has these things, the same thing, and Jesus possibly is the answer. So you could look at it like that Simon is trying to help people here. On the other hand, it could be Simon is thinking, wow, if you come back to the village, we could make you famous.
Yeah.
You are gonna be the number one dude, and maybe even like the Messiah dude in the way that you're saying about dealing with the Romans. And Jesus isn't into that at all. He's not into being a big star.
He's a solitary guy, and maybe he's telling us that that's where God, spirituality, wisdom is found. Like, everyone's looking for you. Well, we're told in the gospel here where the location of Jesus is. It's with God in the quiet bits. Maybe that's a lesson to us when we're doing our searching.
Wow, interesting.
Because there's the Garden of Gethsemane as well, and other solitary moments.
Yeah, how interesting. So, just to get my head around that as well, that's an incredible point. Jesus says, it's almost like Simon, listen, let me put it this way. What's Jesus been doing up to now in the village? He's been healing people and casting out demons, yeah? So Simon's saying, come back, everyone's looking for you. I presume they still want the same thing. I want a few more healings, please. A few more castings out of demons. But Jesus is saying, no, I don't want to do any of that. He's saying, I want to preach. I want to teach. That is interesting, isn't it?
It's interesting. And if he was just a healing machine, there's no journey of faith necessarily. Well, there could be. There's a walk over to Jesus, but there's no actual agency in making that move to find Jesus. Jesus has got to be a bit unavailable for us to wander after him, maybe. But I think also it's a lesson for after Jesus is physically gone, where do we find him, and can we still find him?
Yeah.
There has to be people left behind to show that we have someone to relate to in this story and can also be healed by him.
I am honestly really amazed by this. A really fantastic point. As a lot of the things you've said today really blow me away, because they kind of confirm things that are really deep within me about my own understanding of faith. And it's not something I've noticed before here in this passage. So thank you so much. It's been brilliant. Guys, amazing. It's been brilliant.
I've learned a lot. I'm just enjoying sitting here, just taking just chilling. I'll just ask you a question. This is what we should do. We should just ask a random question and just see how you can connect it. Like, I'll just try and make it as vague as possible. Like, did Jesus have a cat? And you'll be like, well, actually, from what
Guys, thank you so much for being part of this today, and I've hugely enjoyed it. I feel completely stimulated and inspired. I, for one, will be listening again to this podcast. I can tell you that much, and getting a lot out of it. So thank you very much. If there's any message you want to drop to any of your friends right now is the time to say it.
Thank you to you for doing this. We are very proud of you on a personal level. We're so proud of you for this. It's a really cool idea, and it's such an honor to be here. So thank you.
Thank you so much, my love.
And check out Stefan's performance if you haven't already. Like, come on, what are you doing? You listen to the podcast, you might as well go all the way. It's amazing. We've seen it.
I am-mark.com. Yes.
There we go. See, you already know all the information. All you got to do is
press that enter.
Pop it in, press enter, give it a watch.
Fantastic. Thank you so
Incredible.
much. Really honored to have you on the show today, and look forward to seeing you again soon, actually.
Yes, likewise.
Okay, bless you. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye.
If you enjoyed this episode of Question Mark and don't want to miss any future episodes, make sure to click on the subscribe button. This also means other people can find the podcast and join the conversation. We'd also love if you could leave a review so we know what was good and what we can improve for future episodes. Join us and our special guest next time, where we'll continue to explore the greatest story ever told together. If you want to get involved with the podcast or have any questions or comments in the meantime, please do get in touch using the I Am Mark social media channels. We'd love to hear from you.
We light it up, we won't come down, and the sun can't stop us now. Watching it come true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show, where it's covered in all the colored lights, and the runaways are on in the night. Impossible comes true, it's taking over you. This is the greatest show.